Hey out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to the 77th edition of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast, recorded here in London, just off historic Abbey Road, detailing the adventures of an American expat here in London and trying to outline the differences, show you how some bands make it in America, but they don't make it in the UK, or vice versa, or why is something popular in one place, but it's not popular in the other. It's one of those big mysteries. Sometimes it's a cultural thing, sometimes it's an A&R person dropping the ball, sometimes it's the fact that they just didn't translate well to the video age, sometimes it's, I don't really know why somebody makes it one place and doesn't make it someplace else, but if we know it and we like it, we might just talk about it here on the show. And of course, last week's show was a blast. Hanging out with the Shout It Out Loud cast guys, our Pantheon Podcast brothers. We are a member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. About 100 great shows, all sorts of different genres of music. There's something out there for everybody. You can check them out at Pantheon Pods or pantheonpodcast.com. And we always like to say hi to Jay at The Hook Rocks because he has a cool rock show. We got to say hi to Paul at Vintage Rock Pod. And he now has This Day Rocks. It's a daily 7 or 6 minute show that we've been on a couple of times. And of course to the Shout It Out Loud guys who have the best Kiss podcast in the world. Last week they were on talking about Kiss Revenge as it's coming up on its 30th anniversary here. Talking about listening to that in college, going to see that towards the first Kiss show that Jackson and I ever saw, and just reminiscing with those guys, cracking up, having a good time. They've got a great show. You've got to check that out. Also, a non-Pantheon brother, Neil Poole at Def Lep Pod. He's got the best Def Leppard podcast out there. He had us on his show last week. We were talking about a BBC documentary called Rock of Ages, which came out just after Hysteria was released when Steve Clark was still alive. It really is, I think Neil calls it the definitive Def Leppard documentary to that point, certainly through 1988 or so. And it was always fun to talk to Neil. He's been on our show a couple times. So definitely check out Def Lep Pod if you want to hear that. This week, I wanted to do something that kind of connected Shout It Out Loud cast and Def Lep Pod. And that's not the easiest thing in the whole world. And we've done 4 Kiss shows. We've done 2 or 3 Def Leppard shows. So what are we going to do? But I came up with something that I think kind of meets them halfway in the middle. Shout It Out Loud guys are from Boston, and Def Leppard really made their name through the help of producer and engineer god Mutt Lange. And in 1984, Mutt Lange recorded Heartbeat City with The Cars, which was a really big hit in America. It was recorded here in the UK at Battery Studios with Mutt Lange, and it was quadruple platinum in the US. But the song and the records alone don't tell the whole story. This was the age of MTV. MTV launched in August 1981, and by 1984, it was a huge part of the culture. And if you were going to be a hit in America, you had to be on MTV. And the Cars got that, or their management got that, somebody did. And they had a string of videos that were huge, that were cutting edge at the time, got a lot of airplay on MTV, won some of their awards, and really kind of propelled them to be the sound of the mid-'80s. From 84 through 86, you heard the Cars a lot. And you heard a little bit of Rick Ocasek there, one of the lead singers, their main songwriter and really guitar player. Kind of starred in those videos. It really shot his Q rating or made him really the most famous member of the band. We used to kind of share lead singer DBs with bass player Benjamin Orr. By the time they got to their 5th album, Heartbeat City, he was doing the majority of the singing and certainly on the big hits, except for Drive, of course. But we'll get into that here on the show. Now, of course, we want you to download and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And you can tweet us and DM us at ugly_werewolf and at actionjack72. You can let us know if we're doing great, if we're not doing so well. If there's something you want us to cover on the show, whether it be an album, a band, a DVD, a concert, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. We love hearing from our listeners all around the world. So with that, folks, I want to take you back in time to 1984, when a young wolf, still kind of a wolf cub, growing up in the Midwest of America, Action Jackson growing up in New England, the Northeast, didn't know each other. But we both knew MTV, and we both knew the Cars. Even though they had been around for 6 or 7 years before this was our introduction to them. And songs like You Might Think, and Magic, and Drive, the soundtrack to the summer of 1984, and to our lives at that point. So buckle up, because we're talking Heartbeat City by the Cars here on The Wolf.
was thinking Jackson, because now, just recently here in the last couple of weeks, we got to work with our buddy Neil from Def Leppard Pod.
Right.
Talking about the Rock of Ages?
Yes.
Rock of Ages video on BBC, which is out now. And we got to work with the Shout It Out Loud guys, right? So, best Kiss show on earth, our Pantheon pals, and guys who really have shown us a lot of respect and love, over the years, like encouraging us on making our show better and to keep pushing and to have fun with it. And I think it's not just us. I think they're really good with their fans and their listeners in that respect. They communicate well with them, and they, when something's funny or when someone's, needing a laugh, they deliver on it. It was, that was what made it so much fun. It's like, these guys may be on, but then maybe they're off with us. Like, no, man, they were just having fun with us.
Yeah, it was a great time. I was a little nervous about how it was going to go with both of them on there, because they've got, one is a force enough, but the two of them, but it was really smooth.
It was. And it was fun to be with Neil. He's been on our show a couple times, but we had never been on his, really. And anything we can do for him. Both those shows were shows that I listened to when we were just first building our show.
Yeah.
And it's not just shows that I liked, but it shows that I admire, oh, look at the facts they know, or look at the rhythm in which they handle it. Look at how they, are the same each week, or whatever. So just getting to know them, building the community we have through the Ugly American Werewolf in London, it's the highlight, isn't it? It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think that's the real treat, is getting to meet these other people who are like-minded, but then not at the same time. And so you can have discussions about music. And, when we were talking to the Shout It Out Loud guys, they can get along and be friendly, but they can totally disagree with different songs. Like, oh, that's a piece of crap. I can't believe you like that.
Right.
And yeah, to talk to them about stuff like that. Well, like I said, we could have been, when they were talking about sitting around in the dorm room with the Rent-A-Center couches, we could have easily been there for that night.
That's right.
Both in age and in content of material to talk about. So it is really interesting to meet these people. And then Neil, too, who lives on the other side of the earth. He's a little bit younger, but again, we could talk to him for a million years also.
Well, to me, he doesn't live on the other side of the earth. He lives just up north a bit.
Well.
But then I thought, all right, so where do we go from there, right? We've had, our favorite Def Leppard pod, and our, one of our first real friends we've met doing this with Neil Poole recently. And then right after that, we have the Shout Out Loud guys who we love, who have the best Kiss podcast in the world. It's like, where do we go from there? And we kind of have been doing a lot of concert stuff lately. So I'm like, all right, if we're going to do an album, what are we going to do? It's summer coming up. How do we gear up for summer? And I'm like, I got it. I got the perfect band and the perfect record. And that's Heartbeat City by the Cars, because they are from Boston, just like our buddies on Shout It Out Loudcast. And it was produced by Robert John Mutt Lang, who's, of course, the reason for Def Leppard's... should I say he's the reason for Def Leppard's success? I hate to take it away from the boys, but without him, they never would have been what they are.
Right, and you figure that he did, which I didn't know for a long time, that he did High and Dry and Pyromania and Hysteria. So yeah, and that's why I think this is interesting, because he definitely brought his Mutt Lang magic to Heartbeat City.
No doubt.
But this was the only record they worked with him on.
That's right.
So while Def Leppard brought in 1,000% that he was the way to go, I don't know. I don't know why they decided to switch gears after this.
Well, and it's also got a bit of a UK connection here for the Cars, because they made their first record, the Cars, here in the UK. Someplace here in the UK, they made the Cars. And then their next few albums they made in Boston, in New York, usually at the Power Station. I think they worked in LA for one of the records. They worked with Roy Thomas Baker for their first 4 albums, who is English. And he had an incredible career, dude. Worked with Free, worked with Nazareth, worked with Queen, right? Mm-hmm. On Night at the Opera and Sheer Heart Attack and Queen 2, big stinking records. Made the Cars' first 4. Did Journey's Infinity and Evolution when they got Steve Perry into the band and started to become more pop oriented. But look at some of these. Ron Wood's Give Me Some Neck. You did Head Caves with Foreigner. Alice Cooper did the Heavy Metal motion picture soundtrack. One of our very favorites. What was that, show number 4 for us?
Yeah.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High soundtrack, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point, right? Motley Crue's first record, No Rest for the Wicked for Ozzy. So, I mean, this guy has shaped a lot of what we listen to over the years. But
Yeah.
it seemed that the Cars had big success with their first album, and it had a lot of their big original 70s hits on it, right? So, it had My Best Friend's Girl on it. Of course, still a big one to this day for them. It had
Just What I Needed.
Well, that was their first one, right? Just What I Needed.
Yeah.
Big one. And Good Times Roll. All of these kind of hit the charts, and you hear them on rock radio a lot. But, they also have a few, like You're All I've Got Tonight off that one. You'll hear that on rock radio all the time. By Love. You've heard that one on the radio plenty. Not to mention the famous Moving in Stereo, which if you've seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High, you know exactly which scene that song is in.
Brad, I've always thought you were cute. I can't not hear that song and think of that scene and rewind the scene again.
I know, and when I hear it on the radio, it almost sounds like porno music to me, honest to God. Because I just associate it so clearly with that. I'm like, oh my God, that's so funny. And I'm not the only one, I know.
No.
But what that comes out in 78, and it's pretty big. I mean, 6x platinum in the U.S. That's unbelievable. 6 million in sales, and double platinum in Australia and Canada. Around the world, they do really, really well. So, okay, awesome, great. Now, Benjamin Orr at this point is singing about half the songs, maybe, and Rick Ocasek is singing about half the songs. But eventually, over time, that changes a little bit, right? So they go to Candy O with a hot cover, and
yes.
Again, they've got Let's Go, I Like the Nightlife, Baby, and It's All I Can Do. But it's not as big as the first one. It's hard to figure, to follow up the big one. It did have Dangerous Type, which I like.
Yeah, that's a big, I don't know, was that a single?
It was not. Yeah, it was a radio hit.
Yeah.
But so it goes about 4 million in sales in the U.S. It's okay, well, that's still pretty good. But then they do Panorama in 1980, and although it's got a couple of good songs on it, it doesn't do nearly as well. Touch and Go, that did all right, but then the other singles I think were Give Me Some Slack, which I barely know, and Don't Tell Me No. Again, I don't really know that one.
Yeah, the whole second side of that record, I don't think that I could. I mean, if you played it for me, maybe, but
nah.
Yeah.
No, and I think maybe it only just went platinum. So okay, we went 6 million to 4 million to 1 million. What's going on here, guys? So they come back with Shake It Up in 1981, and that's getting them kind of back on track. The title track's a pretty big hit for them. Since You're Gone, I was just watching the video right before we came on here. That was a big one for them. So, they're moving back in the right direction. I think this one maybe goes double platinum, something like that. So it's all right, we got a little traction here, but it's not quite where they want to be, right?
Yeah, that's got to be tough for a band where you come out of the box super hot, because you never think I don't think that you ever say, well, there's going to be a drop off, fellas. We can't maintain this forever. No, you think, if you sell 4, that the next one's going to sell 6 and 8 and on until infinity. So yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, and it's Rick Ocasek writing all the songs, with occasionally Greg Hawkes, the keyboard player. He usually got one co-write per album, and sometimes it was a B-side, but usually somewhere on side 2, about the 8th or 9th track, you would get a Greg Hawkes co-write in there, although Moving in Stereo was one of Greg's co-writes, so God bless him for that.
And thank you for that.
And thank you for that. But see, then things started to change a little bit, because, all right, they put out Shake It Up, it does better, but then MTV comes along, right? And then Rick Ocasek does a solo album called Beatitude, which I didn't recognize any of the songs off Beatitude. It's And so that's going to freak some of the Cars out, because it's all right, now here's our guy who sings half or most of our songs. He writes all of our songs. And now he wants to go off and do a solo album. And I think Greg Hawkes worked with him quite a bit on it. But and some of the other guys did chip in as well, because that's kind of just what you do. But I feel like all of a sudden it's all right, maybe they fulfilled their Elektra contract and they wanted to move on to do something new afterwards. I don't know. I mean, Heartbeat City's on Elektra, or was it Elektra who said we got to get Mutt Lange in here? Or was it the Cars who were like, we need to move on, even though we've had some good success, we need to try something new, and we need to go back to London to Battery Studios, which was also Morgan Studios or Morgan Sound Studios, which is amazing. I mean, part of Led Zeppelin 2 was recorded there, man. And Paul McCartney's first album, and Metal by Pink Floyd, Anticipation by Carly, who just got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I love you, Carly. America's first album was there. Rick Wakeman, Lou Reed, Rod Stewart. I mean, a lot of people have Billion Dollar Babies, Bloody Sabbath. Big time records were recorded there over the years. UFO worked there. Sad Wings of Destiny. Peter Gabriel's first record. I mean, craziness, right?
So maybe that's what it is. Maybe you think, let's recreate some of this magic here. It's not working out exactly the way that we want to. So you go back over there. The other thing that's also kind of I don't want to say dangerous, but weird situation is when you have one guy who's writing the bulk of the music, because at some point in time, somebody's going to talk in his other ear. You don't need these guys. Right. You're the creative genius here. You write all the songs. You sing most of the songs. Come on now. That solo record was his, hey, maybe I don't need these guys anymore. Maybe I can go out on my own. And then it doesn't do so well. And then you're like, no, just kidding. That was a fun side project for me. That was really nothing thing. Let's get back together, guys.
Right. And maybe, Mutt Lange, okay, well, we need a new producer. We need to up the game or something like that. Mutt Lange's like, all right, well, you got to come over here. I'm not working in America. You got to come to London. And that's why they went to Battery.
Right. Well, and with his track record, of course, well, forget it. We're not going to, you're going to do whatever he says to do. Correct. We're on the next plane over there.
And for those of you who don't know, now you know. No, I'm saying, for those of you who don't know what John Robert Mutt Lange has produced over the years, basically starting in the late 70s, he couldn't miss. He did Boomtown Rats, then he did Highway to Hell and Back in Black for AC/DC. Then 404, which was huge, as Jackson mentioned, High and Dry, Pyromania, and Hysteria. It's funny. He was supposed to start working on Hysteria, or Def Leppard wanted him to work on Hysteria with them in 1984, 1985, but he couldn't because he was too busy with the Cars on Heartbeat City. However, due to some unforeseen circumstances, eventually he did have time to work with them on Hysteria. But you do Back in Black, man. I mean, that's like the second highest selling album of all time. Not to mention his eventually wife, Shania Twain.
Right.
I don't, The Woman in Me, is that the one? Or Come On Over. Come On Over is the one. It's the 9th best-selling album of all. It's like the number one country female album of all time, number one country album of all time, number 9 all time. So he's in the top 10 twice of all time, not to mention the diamond-selling Def Leppard records. I mean, the guy has the magic touch.
And I think on those Shania Twain records, he's also credited with writing all the stuff too, or at least co-writes. So yeah, that didn't hurt too badly.
As he is with Def Leppard, he co-wrote most all those songs with heart. He is unpoor and lives in Switzerland. It's incredible, incredible career for John Robert Mutt Lange. But back to Heartbeat City here. So it's kind of like, all right, well, let's just his formula. We're going to take every single song and we're going to make it a big deal or whatever.
Well, that's where you were talking about the Rock of Ages that we watched with Neil and talked to him about it. That was the first time, and I think we all agreed, we'd ever seen a real interview with Mutt Lange. And what stuck out to me there and is sticking out to me now is his comment about don't fall in love with what you wrote. You bring it in and we are going to pound the ever-living crap out of this.
Right.
So yeah, he polishes it to a diamond finish. I wonder how that, for Ocasek, he comes in with these songs, is it like, well, okay, good start, but what do you mean good start? These things are done. No, they're not. Let's get to work on them.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right. But I think the fact that they did have a good band who was honed, and they're a little older. I mean, I think Rick Ocasek was like 40 in 1984 or something like that, Older than your average. I mean, I think in 1984, no one in Duran Duran was 25, right?
Right.
I mean, even the guys in Asia weren't even close to 40 yet, right? And they were grown-up rock stars at that point. So, yeah, I mean, he was a little older, so he'd been around the band, and I think he could stomach working with people. And so Benjamin Orr on bass, who was also the other lead vocalist, like on Drive and things like that. Elliot Easton on guitar, Greg Hawkes on the keys, and I always forget his name because there's someone with a more famous name than him, and that's David Robinson on the drums. Not San Antonio Spurs legend.
No. The interesting thing about this, we were talking about Rick Ocasek writing all of the music, Robinson was the art director for all the stuff, which I
Did
think,
all the covers and stuff.
yeah, which I think was, I mean, it's interesting because usually if you've got somebody like Ocasek, they're doing everything. Like it's their band.
They're the
So to
creative,
have
right?
him, yeah. So to have him do the art direction, that's an interesting, it makes it more of a band dynamic because you've got somebody who's going to, I mean, that's a big deal. The cover is a big deal. And
True.
to have him do that it's just an interesting dynamic.
No, you're right. And this cover was cool. It's a piece by an artist called Peter Phillips called Artomatic Loop de Loop, where they have they've got, is it a Charger? No, it's a Duster, an old Duster, beautiful girl doing a flip. That kind of matches the same style of Candy O, right?
Anyway, yes, in 1984, as a young person, what is cooler than cool cars and pinup girls on an album cover? There's nothing.
It's great. No, you're absolutely right. And it fit in with the time. Like you would see Rio, which was just a little bit older than this, and then you would see this, and you're like, yep, those two fit together, the same genre. They were made about the same time. Yeah, absolutely. So they go into London with all these Rick Ocasek penned tracks, and they got to work. And yeah, I mean, there's 10 tracks on the record. I had the cassette. Did you ever have this growing up? I had it on cassette.
I had it somehow. Yeah, I think it was cassette, but it was like a bootleg cassette. Like somebody had it on a record or something, or a cassette, and I copied it off of that. But I definitely had this in my arsenal. This was our first introduction to the Cars.
Right.
Well, mine anyway. And this was another one of those records like we talked about before, 90125 at Genesis. And I would even put David Bowie's Let's Dance in there. If you grew up in the early 80s.
You mean 90125 for Yes?
Correct, yeah.
And
What
the
did
Genesis
I say,
album for
90210?
Genesis. Well, you said 90125, and then you said Genesis. I'm like, just want to make sure you weren't telling people that 90125 was Genesis.
Correct. 90125 was from Yes. But those records, if you got into it, I know a lot of people were not super excited about this record, Cars fans, because it was really electronic.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, this was my first introduction. So I will always love this. And then I took this and worked it backwards and listened to the rest of the Cars catalog.
Right. And when we're getting into the Cars at this point because we're 10, 11 years old and we're starting to get into popular music, and this is the Cars album that comes out. But B, you really cannot tell the story of the Cars, and certainly not this record, without talking about MTV. Okay,
Correct.
These videos. The thing is, they made 6 of them. I really only ever saw 3, but the 3 you saw were all over MTV. And the You Might Think video, which was their first single, released in February 84, before this thing came out in March of 84. That video with the digital cuts and everything, and the model, and him as the fly buzzing around, and the guys jamming on a bar of soap in the bathtub. And at the time, it was cutting edge, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah, what computer graphics could be. And it was interesting too, because I mean, let's be honest with each other. Rick Ocasek is not the most handsome leading man. He's just an interesting person to look at, and
he's kind of a weirdo.
Yeah, and so this is one of those bands that the only reason that they could do this was because they had some heat behind them. If this was new, if this was a new band, I don't think they ever would have made these videos or anything like that, because he's just, it's like those Journey videos where they're all just kind of standing there on stage. Right. Like, you knew who Journey was, but there was nothing really that exciting about it. This was, but they were one that really embraced the whole concept video too.
They did. They sure did. Yeah. And so, I mean, two things about that. I mean, first of all, I read that, they spent 3 times the typical budget of a video back then on this, which was $80,000, which is, it's no small chunk of change, but at the same time, it's not like, the Estranged video by Guns N' Roses, which maybe cost like $10 million and wasn't even that great of a song, it's like $80,000. We usually spend $25,000. This is nuts, But that video work and that computer graphics stuff, that was expensive. We could do something better on our phones in a day now. But back then, you needed a bunch of computers to make that happen, right? Not easy to do. But 6 singles off a 10-track record, dude. And that's very Mutt Lange, right?
Well, the other thing too is I was looking at You Might Think. You said that was the first single released in February of 1984. The last single was Heartbeat City, released September 1985.
Yeah.
So this thing just kept putting singles out. Like as soon as you kind of started to forget about one, here's another one, and then the sales would go up. So to have it not only be that big, but go on for that long is pretty incredible also.
Yeah, and there's no real, I mean, I had the cassette, and sometimes with cassettes you would fast forward through stuff, or you would click to the end so you get the start of the second side because they might have a hit on there. But really, this one you could listen to back and forth without skipping anything.
Hey, this is Tom and Zeus from Shout It Out Loudcast, and you are listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast.
If we start to walk through it a little bit here, you start off with Hello Again, which is, an interesting way to start a record. Hey, we're back, hello. Hello again, but you can already hear, God, this thing is super polished, and it's got a lot of programmed stuff in it, right? I mean, this is very of the times.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this too. I don't think there's one of those. The harmonies on Pyromania are not really like this. This was going to show up a lot more on Hysteria. That if you didn't know any better, you could almost swear it was Def Leppard just from that first hello again. But then, yeah, if you were a hardcore Cars fan, you're not going to like this one because this is all electronic. Yeah. I love it, but I could see how you would be upset.
Yeah, if you came in with My Best Friend's Girl and you're you like the rockin' sound, but they're new wave rock. I mean, how would you classify them? I would call them new wave rock and roll. I wouldn't call them rock and roll without the new wave, though.
Right. I think they were part of the new wave, but they were also it almost seems like they were their own thing, because then you could also say they were a little bit rockabilly too. Maybe they were pulling from that. So I don't know. We always have to label everything in the music industry, but if you had to, that would be the closest, would be new wave.
Yeah, I think you're right. So yeah, it's a fun song. It was left off the greatest hits, but it probably shouldn't have been. You can only put so many songs on there, so you can't just put them all in there. But I thought it probably should have been on there. I'd never seen the video before because it was directed by Andy Warhol, so Andy's going to put some freaky sexual stuff in there and stuff that wasn't going to play in the Midwest in 1984, so it was a little racy in spots, and it had some kind of people who hung out with Andy Warhol, which would have freaked us out at 10, 11 years old. We're like, what is that? If you look quickly and closely, you can see a very young Gina Gershon in there.
I did not. I read about that, and then I had to go back and look because, yes, hello, Gina Gershon.
I'm a fan, yes.
Yes, if you're out there listening, yes, big fan.
But they wouldn't have played that on MTV during the day if they did it all. I mean, if they did it all, they would have done it like 2 a.m. or something like that. But I never saw that video before. But a good way to start off a record. It did well. It hit the charts.
Yeah, real statement. Like you said, hello again, and then bam, right into it.
It was their 4th single. That was released in October of '84. So starting off strong with a single, but it was their 4th single. Then you go into Looking for Love, which is a pop ballad. It's a song for girls, is what I would have said back in the day. But it's got a good beat to it. It's got that Mutt Lange signature backing vocals. Looking for love,
Yeah. And then at this point in time, I don't know. I don't know what we're doing, because I'm like, I can hear guitar, but is that really a guitar, or is that synth? Right. I know there was a deal about Robinson being kind of disenfranchised by this record because there's drums on it, but not a whole lot that he played. So I don't know. Right. It's hard to kind of pick out, is that really the person playing, or is that a program from Mutt Lange?
Right. And no, I mean, they give him credit, like Fairlight Programming by David Robinson for the drums and Fairlight Programming by Greg Hawkes for the keyboard. So they program their own stuff. But it was something I always thought, as a young man, I thought, wow, these are cool sounds that they make. Like, can they reproduce this live? I mean, I know The Who, listen to Bob O'Reilly. Well, no, that's programmed. I mean, Pete may have done it back in the day, but that's programmed. So you can put programming in and then play with it. But can they pull it off? I don't know. I just know Looking for Love, it's a sweet, nice song, but it's easy listening, like adult contemporary kind of stuff. That's not really a rock song, if you ask me.
And if you listen hard enough to a lot of these songs, there's stuff in the background too, like little sound effects that are firing off. And I saw an interview with Hawks, and he said he just loved He just loved anything like that. He wanted something no one else had. Like if you can come up with a little gadget or whatever, send it to me, I'll use it. So this was like before, like, you couldn't have a laptop and do this. You had to have little deals. And so they were saying at Live Aid, it was really hot or something, I think, especially on the stage. And he was like, the things were going off all the time. Like I couldn't make them stop. So like it didn't have anything to do with it. And so everybody else is like, what are you doing back there? He's like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is a handmade thing that somebody sent me and I don't know why it's not working.
My goodness. Poor guy. I know I did get to rewatch a lot of that Live Aid. And yeah, some of it was a little off. Which is, you got to figure it's got to happen on a day like that when you're trying to parade 30 different bands across or whatever it was. But, again, so there's something for the guys and the girls. There's rockers, there's sweet kind of soft songs, and then we get to the third song, Magic. To me, this is the song. As big as you might think is and as big as the video is, to me, this song, Magic, in the summer of '84, it was a good rival to Panama. Like, Panama was when you're rocking with your boys, right?
Yeah.
But Magic was like you could be at a party with the girls and the boys, like mingling and having fun, and everyone liked this song.
And it seemed like, too, you say party. Did you think of party, or do you remember the video where they're having this giant party? So now it's like the two things are coming together. Like the video is influencing how you think about this. I always thought it was weird that apparently Rick Ocasek is hosting a pool party. He's the whitest person on the face of the earth. No. He's wearing a suit out by the pool, but hey, okay, whatever, it'll work.
You can see in the first minute of the video when he's walking around the pool or whatever that he's squinting because he's not used to being. You always see him with his shades on, right?
What is this thing in the sky? It's called the sun, Rick.
I know. Well, I got to stay out of it, But I don't know. For me, this is one of those songs like Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic. When you hear it, it just automatically puts you in a good mood.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. I think this is probably the signature song. Yeah, again for me on this one because you're right. It came out. When did it come out?
It was like May.
Yeah, so right into the summer, and you're right. This was on every third loop too.
Every third hour. I'm telling you, yes. Yeah. June and July, you saw it all the time. Not to mention, you might think was still always in the loop because it was such an innovative video. So they played it every day at some point. Yeah. And now we've got a new one. And I got to tell you, that effect when he's walking on the pool, it blew my mind in 1984. I'm like, oh my God, how is he doing that? That's unbelievable.
And especially too, because so you think, okay, wait a minute. The pool is only like, a couple inches deep. I know how they're doing it. But then at the end, people start jumping in and you can see that it's not. It's a real pool. So you're like,
what in the world? Magic. Yeah, I know. Dude, I never knew. In researching for this, the first time they shot it, it broke, and he fell through, and they had to readjust it for Rick's weight. I'm like, what do you mean readjust it for Rick's weight? He doesn't weigh 170 pounds. I mean, it wasn't safe for like 170 pounds. Are you kidding me? What would happen if I would have walked on it? The whole thing would have shattered, But another interesting tidbit is that's the Hilton family's Hollywood house. They rented to the Cars to do that shoot. So you can imagine what filthiness has occurred there over the years.
Yeah, that video was probably the tamest thing that happened there.
Exactly. But it was weird. I mean, it wasn't just like there was a pool party and then you saw a bunch of people there. You saw a couple of fangirls. And then you saw a couple of people dressed like they were Jesus and Mary. And then you saw a couple of, socias, from like the outsiders. And then you saw or a couple of circus creatures or something. I don't know. It was a bunch of random weirdos, and some fangirls. And then they all start jumping in the pool, like loving on Rick. But I got to tell you.
I was going to say, I think perhaps John McClane said it best when he got off the plane. California.
Right. Now, everyone talks about how weird Rick Ocasek looks and how he's kind of an oddball. And I get it. I'm not going to say you're wrong about that. But you have to understand, he's this skinny, white, pasty pale guy with dark black hair and blue eyes. That's exactly who I was in 1984, okay? Skinny, tall, pasty, couldn't get a suntan for anything, blue eyes, jet black hair like Superman. So when I saw him, I'm like, I don't know, it was like attracted to him. Like, it's like, God, I could be that. Because like when I see David Lee Roth, I'm like, I could never be that dude. He's got a lion mane of blonde hair. He's ripped. He can do these kicks. He's tan. I'm like, he had muscles. I'm like, that ain't me. You know, like that's something I'll never be.
Well, and it's nice that this happened kind of in the early days of MTV, because you're right. You know, fast forward probably 5 or 6 years, people like this really couldn't get on. They were just looking for the Duran Duran types.
Right. He would have had to, tune down and gone on 120 minutes or something like that.
Right. Exactly.
But no, I still to this day, I think it's an amazing song. The video for the summer of 1984 was perfect, and they cleaned up at the VMAs or whatever it was for MTV. One big time for you might think, and
yeah.
They deserved it. Now, still on side one. Okay, we're only 3 songs into the 5-song 5-1. The next one is Drive, which is
correct.
Huge around the world. Like, which rock band songs do the best? It's always the ballads. Like, people remember the rockers because they're fun, but the ones who sell the best and go the highest up the charts are always the ballads, and this is no different.
Yeah, and this is where unfortunately, both Ocasek and Orr are now passed away, but I would love to know what his process was. Did he write this song for Orr, or did he write it and then do they try it out and this, you take this one? Because this is a real nice change of pace. You had 3 Ocaseks. Mm-hmm. Now you throw in Orr. Some of the delivery is the same, but some of it isn't. It's just a really nice change up with his voice coming in on this song.
Well, I got to tell you, he's the better singer of the 2. I don't really know if that's debatable.
He is.
I mean, yeah, right? It's pretty obvious.
Well,
he's got a rich voice. He holds the notes well.
Okay. So I knew we were going to come to this. And so I was thinking, it's like ZZ Top. Okay. If you listen to like Dusty Hill songs, he's got a better voice.
Yeah.
But Billy Gibbons has the ZZ Top voice.
Right.
I think the same is true for this. Rick Ocasek, he can't sing. He can't out-sing Orr, but the stuff that he does, his voice fits perfectly.
He sings well. Yeah, that's right. That's true. Yeah. So you're right about that. But yeah, I mean, it's a complicated relationship between Rick and Benjamin Orr. Like, they were good buddies who eventually, throughout the lifetime of the Cars, eventually kind of grew to dislike each other. It's sad.
Yeah. It really is, because you can see how this formula really works well, because you're right. I mean, you had... This was, I mean, I'm guessing this was the big hit, right? Was Drive?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Top 10, top 5 around the world.
And so, how do you, if you're Ocasek, how do you, unless you wrote this for him, how does that make you feel? Like, I wrote all these songs, I sing most of these songs, but the one that I don't is huge. And, even on going all the way back to the first one, Just What I Needed, that's written by Ocasek, sung by Orr, huge hit.
Well, yeah. But then, you look at it at the beginning of the Cars, they were kind of half and half or so, and I think before they got signed, Rick Ocasek didn't really want to sing at all. Like, he's like, Benji, you can sing them all as far as I'm concerned. And then he started to figure out, all right, well, I got to step in to do some of these songs for myself. But this is only one of 2 Orr songs on the 10 tracks on the record. So over time it did whittle down. So then he's like, okay, well, if I'm going to give Ben a song, which ones am I going to give him? Right. This is an amazing one to give him, right?
Yes. Yeah, and it fits perfectly. You're right. He can, because Ocasek doesn't really sing like he did. Like he
kind of speaks his truth.
Yeah, exactly. Where Orr can really belt it out. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. But see, he still wins, because you say, oh well, then Ben is the singer on this huge worldwide hit. But then in the video, Ben's got to be busy singing the song, whereas Rick can go be the guy fighting with the model they chose for the video, which just happened to be an 18-year-old Paulina Poroskova. And
if we can just stop there for a minute. Speaking of Paulina Poroskova, she recently posted a photograph of herself in some swimwear with the tag Old and Ugly. You picked up on that.
Yep.
Let me tell you, folks, if that's Old and Ugly, sign me up, because
Absolutely.
Holy Christmas, that's outstanding.
And she's never had any like Botox or filler or any of that stuff.
No.
She's still absolutely gorgeous. And Rick was married. Rick was married when they met, and he was married for about 3 or 4 more years after they met and started dating. Rick has had 6 sons, 2 with each of his wives. And like, he married his first wife in the 60s, had 2 kids. In 71, they divorced. And in 71, he got remarried. And then he had 2 sons with that woman, Suzanne, I think was her name. Okay, so they stayed married till 1988 or something like that, and then in 1989 he married Paulina. So he was, and then they had 2 kids, right? 2 sons. So he was basically always married, just to 3 different people for about 50 years. And we can get a little bit more into that later. But no, Drive was huge hit on the radio, huge on MTV. We all got to see Paulina. Actually directed by Timothy Hutton. Didn't know that.
Yeah, I saw that too. I'm like, that's interesting. I never knew that. Turk 182 was also a director. But yeah, I mean, it was a contrast also from the other 2 that we saw. It was black and white. Mm-hmm. It was more artistic.
Stylish.
There were no effects. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that was a different deal also.
What was the movie he did at the military academy with Sean Penn and Tom Cruise? Taps.
I believe, yes.
So who would have thought in Taps, you think Timothy Hutton already has an Oscar for Ordinary People. He's working with Sean Penn, and then he starts to direct stuff like, well, Timothy Hutton's the big star. Sean Penn's the guy who played Spicoli. No. Sean Penn's kind of like the multi-generational superstar. And Tim's still a good actor. He still looks pretty good. But he's not Sean Penn, is he? But I thank you for directing that video there, Timothy. Proud of you. Then to wrap up side 1 is Stranger Eyes. Mm-hmm. This is very techno, dude. There's a lot of programming in this.
To me, this is where it kind of shows its age a little bit. When I was listening to this, the beginning of this straight up sounds like, what was this, 85? So say 86, 84. 87. Mm-hmm. This was 84. Okay, so fast forward to like maybe 85 or 86. The beginning of a cheesy cop show, Night Beat. Yeah. The streets of Chicago will never be the same. It's like, oh, this sounds like it just sounds very of the time, the beginning of this. Interesting that we're putting another Or tune back to back.
Yeah, that is. I thought that was interesting too. Like, he only gets 2, so let's just put them back to back at the end of side 1 before we get to You Might Think on the other side. But I don't know. I think it's got good techno mixed with some ringing guitars. It's not got like big riffs, but it's got some nice ringing guitar in it from Elliot Easton. More Mutt Lang backing vocals. I mean, the chorus, Stranger, that's so Mutt Lang. And so 1984. It's unbelievable.
But it is nice. It is a nice change of pace from Drive. I mean, we're kind of flipping it's a little darker. It's a little more of a rocker than they had before.
It's more upbeat than Drive. Yeah. But it's also not, I think you're right on right there. Yeah. So, and an interesting way to kind of wrap up the side, because you have a couple of big hits. You have a kind of a ballad with Drive. And then, but Stranger Eyes, it's mellow though. There's kind of a mood to it. They could have played this during a scene on Miami Vice.
Absolutely.
Maybe,
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So then we get to side 2 here, and it's the big one. It's the first single that was the huge MTV hit. You Might Think. I got to tell you, it's fun, man. Another one. As soon as I start to hear the chords or I start to hear the piano on it to begin, I'm like, God, this is a good song. This is good times, man. This is Life is Good song, right?
It takes you right back to, I know it came out a little bit earlier, but I somehow equate this with the summer of 84 also, probably because it was still hanging around. But you're just right back there again. I think this one really highlights Elliot. I know he doesn't write the songs, so he kind of just puts his part in, but he reminds me a lot of Andy Taylor from Duran Duran.
Yeah.
It's not flashy, but dare I say, just what you needed on these songs. But it's just perfect for, exactly when you need a couple of, the power chords, or the solos they're not flashy, but they fit in really well with this. Powerful, but understated.
It's very 80s. It's very that kind of new wave, meets like, the Knack and those people who were not quite up to snuff, but they were of the era. It's kind of very of that, it's not blowing you away. but it makes sense. Or, go to Mike Campbell in the You Got Lucky song. That guitar part is very spare, even the solo, but it also fits it perfectly, right? And it's around the same time as well. So it's like the big blues guitar, Eric Clapton, everybody step back. We're going to take 8 bars for the guitar solo, put the spotlight on him. That had changed, and I think that's okay. That's part of what made this music, I think, accessible to everybody, because you see the bands, maybe you see someone stand out for a while, but it's not like, okay, there's just this one dude.
Right. It's not like the Eddie Van Halen where it's like, I could never play that. That's too insane.
Crazy,
this was just the song. You know exactly what it is. It doesn't sound like anything else. It didn't sound like anything else that was around at that time.
I know.
And you wanted to see the video because it had all the cutting edge computer graphics.
Yeah. Cutting edge computer graphics. You had a beautiful girl, a model who's like in the tub and in her nightgown and stuff like that, and looking beautiful, and with this weirdo kind of sitting next to her, and the band hopping around.
Sunglasses the entire time.
The whole time, and then he basically twisted him and pulled his face off at the end so everybody could fall out his face. Look, dude, laugh all you want, but for a while, when MTV would do top 100 videos of all time, it was like number one from like 1984 to 1985. And even like 86 and 87, once like Money for Nothing had come out, and or it was number 2. It was like Thriller was 1, and then that was 2 for the longest time. Like this is cutting edge stuff, And for years it was in the top 10, which is amazing, because you think about like pop music is so disposable, and there's so many videos out there, and it might be great in 1983, but 1986, nobody cares, right? But for the longest time it did. By the way, did you see that Stranger Eyes was used like in the promos for Top Gun?
I read that, but I do not remember that from that time. No,
I don't either. If anyone finds that promo, I would love to see it, because it didn't end up in the movie, or at least it didn't end up in the soundtrack. It may have been in the movie. I'm not a huge Top Gun guy. It's like, oh, jet planes, isn't it cool? I'm like, no. Plus, I always knew there was something wrong with Tom Cruise. I just couldn't put my finger on it.
However, there's nothing wrong with Val Kilmer.
Love him. Well, I mean, except he can't really talk anymore, I don't think. But
I'm talking about in the movie.
Love Val Kilmer. Yeah.
Yes.
But Real Genius was his greatest work, let's face it. All right. Yeah, no. So you might think amazing song. Again, it's, it's of a time, but I don't know. It's when I hear it, it puts a smile on my face. I'm like, oh, I know this one, man. You know? All right. So they move on to It's Not the Night, which, I mean, Benjamin Orr sings some of the lead on this, right? Do they go back and forth a little bit on this?
They go back and forth. And this is the one to me that really proves that Orr is the better singer. He's got the more powerful voice. Mm-hmm. And we're darker on this one. It's the all synth at the beginning, and then the guitars come in after that. So you kind of, if you're thinking, oh, this is going to be an all synth deal, it turns out it mellows out a little bit.
Yeah, the program bit at the beginning is very of the time to me. Like that just screams like 1984, early 80s or whatever. But it's more rockin' than, say, Stranger Eyes, which I like.
Right.
And it's more rockin' than the next one, Why Can't I Have You, which is pretty much a ballad, for the most part. It actually made the charts, even though it was never released as a single. Because I know they had 1 or 2 singles that maybe didn't make the charts, but this one did, because radio stations like to play it. And I also think that there was maybe a bit of a surge for Ben Orr. It's like, The Drive was huge, right? The Drive was huge, but then Stranger Eyes is kind of, I'm not going to say like it, but it's too soft, adult contemporary anyway. But then, It's Not the Night is a little bit more rockin'. So maybe like the rock fans who like Ben Orr's voice, like, this is the one you ought to play, I don't know.
I'm sure there were probably fans in both camps. Like, not that I only like the Orr songs, but I like those better. Those are mine. So yeah, maybe that's why they gravitated toward that.
Maybe so. But I like it. It's a good one. It's not one I would ever skip.
It definitely picks up once the guitars come in, like, because at the beginning you're like, I don't know about this, and then the guitar comes in, makes it a little heavier. Okay, here we go.
Right.
Let's rock out a little bit.
Absolutely. No, it's a good one. It's a good one. And then the third song, or the eighth song overall, third song on the second side, Why Can't I Have You? I don't really remember this one, Jackson. I mean, do you? Because this was the fifth single in January of 85, so now we're already like through a whole year, basically, of this song.
No, I don't remember this one being on the radio.
I don't either. And I saw the video, and I don't remember it well. I know that. It's not something I saw a lot. It's not like something I remember, but maybe I saw it back in the day. I just don't remember it that well. It is basically a Rick ballad. It's kind of a stylistic video where the boys are sitting together playing their instruments kind of in this white room, and then there's a black room in front of them, and they're just kind of, it's like there's a cutout circle that almost looks like something out of Star Wars. It's like they're through this wall, this big oval, and then on the other side there's this beautiful dancer who's like in sick shape, like, could have been the girl who stood in for Jennifer Beals rather in Flashdance. Like, she was amazingly hot. So I liked it. But was there a little keyboard speak on this? A lot like what Peter Frampton and Jeff Beck and Joe Walsh used to do with the guitar.
That's what it sounded like. Yeah, it's something like that. It's like I said, it's hard without actually seeing what they were doing in the production studio to know what's what anymore with Mutt Lange.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff on this thing. They use a lot of different, I mean, for lack of a better word, a lot of gadgets, a lot of toys, a lot of little things, programming things in here that they're using. The girl was so foxy, the dancer they used. This was the only single that was backed with a non-album B-side called Breakaway. Have you ever heard Breakaway before?
No, I have not.
Neither had I. Yeah, I don't think anyone had. And I listened to it. I'd never heard it before. It was funny because it kind of sounds like it's at the time like, this could be a Simple Minds song with lousy vocals, is the way I looked at it. Because Rick, again, he's not really singing, he's kind of talking through it. There's none of that kind of like backed up vocals that kind of shape the whole album. There's none of that on it. It's kind of like something they might use in an 80s movie montage where you have to move the story along or show them restoring the boat and getting it ready for the big race or whatever. Like, that's the kind of thing. It's got odd guitar work from Elliott in it. I mean, look, it's a B-side. It didn't really fit. It kind of fit the time, but it didn't fit the rest of the record. But yeah, all the rest of them had either like live versions of previous hits, or they just used the other songs on the album that weren't released as singles. And sometimes they even used the other singles, so they
here it is again.
Yeah, they had a dance remix, I think, of the first one of Hello Again. But I always thought maybe, is this a preview to Rick's huge solo hit, Emotion in Motion?
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, it's along the same lines. That song's a little more dressed up, but it's kind of along the same lines.
It could be. And I remember when that came out, and I thought it was, if you didn't know any better, when it's on the radio, you don't. I thought that was a Cars song.
Yeah, of course. We all did.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, the ninth song, I Refuse. If you got to pick one song they had to ditch, I mean, look, if Breakaway had made the album, it would have been Breakaway. But the weakest track on here is I Refuse. It's barely over 3 minutes. It was used as a B-side like 3 times. Like 3 of the songs have I Refuse as their B-side or something like that. So they never believed in this song. So, I mean, look, it fits the record, and it's not bad. It's 10 out of the 10.
Yeah, and it's tough on something like this where you have so many hits that there's going to be one that lets you down, and it's not a surprise why this is the number 9 track.
Right. No, absolutely. So we won't spend too much time on it. But then they wrap it up with the title track, Heartbeat City. And I think this is a cool way to end the record, man.
Yeah. It's interesting that the title track is the one on the end. We've got, it's kind of like it's like a nice mellow, like send off. There you go. It's big stuff on here. Yeah. This was a single. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said, just a nice way to end the record.
Yeah. And it's a little, dare I use the P word, proggy.
Uh-oh. Oh boy.
I mean, I know, look, none of these songs are over 4.5 minutes. This is the longest song on the album by a nose. So, and at this time, even people like Yes and Genesis, who made their bones with long, proggy songs, they weren't making songs like that anymore. Or, they made
Right.
an album and it was buried on the second side. So that wasn't going to be it. But I felt like if there was any song on this album that they could stretch out and they could do like a 6 or 7 minute version of it, this would be the one.
Yeah. And again, it fits in. It is the synth at the beginning sounds a little. It's interesting to me. It's of the time, but if you listen to it, you can hear the other stuff that's in there. They're just kind of like peppering other sound effects in there. So it's a cool one to listen to with headphones too, because you can hear right and left what they're doing. I mean, I would have loved to have. I don't know if they've got any footage of Mutt Lange in the studio doing this, but it would be really cool to watch him work and see how all the things get put together to make the final song. I
totally agree. Yeah, because it was kind of a little bit of a masterpiece, And the thing is, I never saw this video either before doing research for this. Part of the reason was it was not released as a single in America, right? And if they don't release it for the radio, they're not going to play the video on MTV. So I don't think we ever saw it. I think they used it as a tool to market it abroad and market it in England. But also, it came way afterwards, right? So, yeah, it's the 6th single. The 5th one was released in January of 85. Well, Heartbeat City came in September of 85. I mean, that's way later. I mean, that's 9 months later, 8 months later, whatever kind of thing. But also, Rick was already starting to kind of move on to work on his solo album, This Side of Paradise, which we can get into here a little bit in a minute. But so then they wrap that up, Heartbeat City. It was backed with Why Can't I Have You, the 5th single, and again, mostly basically outside of America. But I love that song, and again, it's a great way to wrap up the record. I mean, it's not even 40 minutes. 10 songs, no fat on there, and back in the high life again, as far as another 4 or 5 million seller in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, I think they accomplished exactly what they wanted to. They wanted to get back to being a super relevant band, album sales wise, singles wise, and they definitely did it on this one. I could see how if you were looking for more of the rock and roll, new wave, this was not it. I know that a lot of people have a problem with Mutt Lange because he quote unquote overproduces things, but you can't argue with success.
No, that's for sure. And the video showed what was their stage, and their stage show was kind of amazing. That had all these TVs and had this real tall thing built there. I'm like, God, that looks like it would have been a killer show. But they're not really any live Cars DVDs or albums out there. They eventually did one in 2006, which I think was from Door to Door, which came out in 87. But the quality was bad. But I looked at setlist.fm for the setlist from the 84 tour, and it was amazing. I'm like, oh my God, I'd have died to see them on that tour, especially if they were pretty good live, if they could reproduce it. And then when I saw that stage for the Heartbeat City video, I'm like, oh man, that would have been killer to see in 84, man. Are you kidding me? Why isn't there anything of it? I looked around. There's something from Texas, like they filmed at the Summit. It looks like it was made for TV kind of thing. Like maybe, a cable channel like Showtime said, we're going to give you an hour of the Cars live in Houston, where they cut about half of the show together. And you can find it on YouTube. It's pretty high quality. And you see that stage, you're like, God, this is it. This is cool. But there's nothing else available. And that kind of makes me sad because that's, it doesn't tarnish their legacy, but it makes it harder to continue the legacy without that.
Right. And the other thing I was looking for too, some kind of documentary or something about this record, because I know there are classic album. Right. I couldn't find anything. And
I know.
If there's one that you could have everybody talking about, including Mutt, this would be the one. But I could, like I said, I looked all over. I couldn't find anything on this.
Well, no, that's the thing. And I guess, Rick he did make some solo records. He went on to produce a lot of bands like Weezer, and kind of, I think, wanted to not be on the road and not be on the stage, wanted to be behind the scenes because he gets all of the writer money, right? He gets all the royalties from the song, right. So he doesn't have to go out and do anything. But also during these sessions, they wrote Tonight She Comes, which was, a hit off of the Cars' Greatest Hits album, which I had, and we listened to once in a while in college. But it was released and hit, number one mainstream rock and top 10 Billboard. And, they made a video for it because that was the thing. You couldn't just release a Greatest Hits album. You had to have Greatest Hits plus a couple of songs, right? So that was kind of the new one, quote unquote, and a hit for them and helped propel that one because So that's 1985. That's 6 times platinum in the U.S. So in '84 they got 4x platinum with original stuff. The next year it's 6x. Not to mention all the sales around the world. So yeah, right when they're releasing Heartbeat City in the rest of the world, they're breaking out the greatest hits album with Tonight She Comes in America. So they're riding pretty high right here.
Right. And that would lead you to think, you're talking about writing money. Ocasek is now in a position where he's, maybe I can take a step back because, touring is tough, being out on the road. Now you're going to have a very young wife to, be at home with. So I'm sure that was part of it. But yeah, it's a grind being out there and moving from town to town. And that was really before the days of, everybody flying private jets. So you're still on a bus or something driving all over the United States and Europe and everything else. So yeah, I could see how, and you kind of get the if the times are a changing as far as like what they're looking for in a band, now you're not the pretty boy band. So yeah, maybe I will just take a step back and work behind the scenes.
Well, except, here's the thing, so then, the second new song off the greatest hits, I'm Not the One, that comes out in 1986. Then later in 1986, Rick releases his second solo album, This Side of Paradise, which is actually a pretty big hit. Doesn't sell into the multi-millions or anything, but it does have the big hit Emotion in Motion, which it had a big video on it. True to You was another one, but he got all sorts of people to play on this thing. This wasn't just like, well, I'll get Greg Hawkes to do some keyboards, maybe Ben could do some backup vocals. No, he got Steve Stevens to play all over it. He got Roland Olafable from Tears for Fears, to play on it.
Do you have that in front of you? When did that come out?
September 1986.
Okay, because October 6th, 1986 comes The Lace from Ben Orr. So now we've got 2 competing Cars solo records, and that's when you say, oh, I think maybe we've got a change in the weather here if they're both putting out solo records.
Well, yeah.
Because a lot of times, like if one person puts out a solo record, that's kind of like I'm just going to take a little step out. If 2 of them now, you can see there's probably something going on here.
Yeah, and Ben probably wanted to write more. His girlfriend was a writer, and he used to say, "Hey, or his wife, why don't you take some of her stuff?" And Rick Ocasek goes, "Because she's not in the Cars, then it won't be the Cars," kind of thing, So, but Rick was on Geffen, right? So you get that Geffen machine behind you in the 80s. Get you the stylish video and push it out there, and he did very well with it. So now he's like, okay, now my band had about their biggest album, certainly the biggest since the first. Then our greatest hits album is huge, and it's got big singles around it. Now my solo album, not only does well, it does way better than Ben's, despite Ben saying he's the better singer. It does way better than Ben's. So then he's like, okay, now when we do the next Cars album, Door to Door in 1987, I'm going to be the producer. And I'm going to write all the songs. Although I think he co-wrote the one "You Are the Girl." No, he wrote that. It's just Orr sang it with him. It's not a good record. I mean, like the time had passed, and the thing is, they retread a few things from back from '77 or '78. Stuff that they had worked on back in the day, and then we can clean that up. I have a feeling that after writing everything that was so huge on Heartbeat City, writing the tracks for the greatest hits album, then doing his own solo album, I feel like the cupboard was a little bit bare by the time they got to Door to Door.
The other problem is other issue is, if you went back and looked at every album that was, written, produced by the same person or persons, it's not going to work. You've got to have somebody in the control booth that says that's not good. It's not good. Play it again. This isn't what you want. You can only take it so far without having somebody else come in there. Like if it's produced by Rick Ocasek and somebody else, okay, fine. At least you've got that. But if he's doing everything, it's just not going. You have to have that person saying that's not a good idea.
Yeah,
leave that.
And
song.
Mutt Lange couldn't work with them because now he was working with Def Leppard on Hysteria. So funny how that worked out. Couldn't work with Def Leppard on Hysteria because he was busy with the Cars. Then he couldn't work with the Cars because he was busy with Def Leppard on Hysteria. So it all kind of comes full circle. But at that point, then it is over. The Cars are over. The time had passed. Music had changed. The 80s were more about hard rock and what people kind of pejoratively call hair bands or that kind of thing. but hard rock was in, and alternative music like REM and that kind of stuff, that was in. And the Cars kind of pseudo new wave techno stuff, that was on the way out. So Rick Ocasek's like, yeah, I got my money and I got a beautiful wife and I'd rather just do that or her than tour with these guys. So that's it. So that was the end of the Cars basically, and it probably should have been.
Yeah. And I know they kind of got back together and did some stuff, luckily, before Orr passed away. There's a interview with him with the whole band, like right before he died, and it just looks awful. So the fact that they kind of, I think they had a reconciliation at some point in time, makes me happy, because you just never know what's going to happen. And to have this catalog of music, this band that was a pretty big force in the 70s into the 80s, definitely, to have them get back together and play shows for people who never got to hear them the first time is pretty. I like the fact that there was a silver lining.
Yeah, then eventually they did a move like this in 2011 after Benjamin died, because we died in like 2000. Eventually, Rick got back together with the remaining guys in the Cars, and they not only did some dates, but they made this record, Move Like This. And of course, it shot into the charts, and I think it just kind of quickly went away. It's kind of a nostalgia thing. But I remember when they were touring, and I thought to myself, maybe you should go. Because it's not like they did like an 80-date tour and they were going to come to my town. I think they did like 20 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe I should go. Maybe I should get to New York or get to Boston and go, because I don't think this is going to happen again. And I really did love the Cars back in the day, and this might be my only chance. And of course it was, and I let it pass. I didn't need to travel to go see them without Ben Orr. I mean, who's going to? Rick sang "Drive." Man, that's not right. It's not going to sound right, So I'm like, nah,
right.
Let's just move on, So that Heartbeat City, to me, the first album may have outsold it. But to me, Heartbeat City, thanks to Mutt Lange, thanks to the time, thanks to those music videos, and then the short time afterwards, between Greatest Hits and Rick Ocasek solo, for a few years there, that was the sound of the mid-'80s. Yeah,
and like we were talking about before, it really is, it's an interesting thing, because it was about the music. It was before MTV took over as far as being the dominant force in propelling people who maybe shouldn't. It was more looks than music. This was kind of that perfect time where you could have a kind of a quirky band like this have really big success.
And they had the look. I mean, Elliot Easton had the hair and those kind of big John Lennon shades on, and Greg Hawkes, he always had that kind of spiky hair, and everybody looked the part. Rick Ocasek, spiky black hair, I mean, he always looked the part. A bit of a weirdo, but he fit for the time, and it's not like they weren't talented. They could play. They came up playing Boston and playing colleges and tough places, so I mean, they earned their right to be on the scene, but it was basically
Absolutely.
10 years. 78 to 87 is essentially when they made everything they ever did. Six records in 10 years. And hey, it got them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame eventually.
And it was cool during the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that it was either that or it was on, they were on like Jay Leno or one of those late night things, and they played Just What I Needed. This was after Orr had died, and people were like, Ocasek didn't sing that song. He's singing that for Ben Orr, stupid. It's a tribute.
Yep, and he wrote a song, Silver, I think, that ended up on Move Like This as kind of a tribute to Ben. But I don't know if they parted on great terms. It's just kind of sad, the two friends who were in a band making music together, coming up together. And then they had huge success, but they couldn't really enjoy it together. And there was no reunion tour with him. There was no reunion album.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that it's kind of sad. It's like nobody wins,
Yeah.
Even Paulina doesn't win, because they were getting divorced, and then Rick just died. But before he died, he changed his will to say Paulina gets nothing,
That's weird. That was a long time. That was a long time partnership that I don't know what happened there. I mean, the same thing. Would you see Dan Aykroyd's getting?
Well, I think they're just separating. Technically, they're not divorcing.
Years?
Maybe, I don't know. I don't really care either way.
Right?
But you're right. Yeah, it's like after 40 years, you're ready to break up. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, whatever you want to do.
Yeah. Well, it would. Yeah. What is it now? That's the final straw. That is strange. That was kind of a weird relationship, because. Yeah, I guess they had. I'm talking about Paulina and Rick. I guess even though they were married, they'd been estranged for a while.
Well, look, maybe he just wasn't into having a chick around anymore. Is the only thing I can think of, because you had Paulina from her teens to her 50s. right? She's the most beautiful woman in the world in her teens and 20s and 30s. And in her 40s, she's the most beautiful woman for her age, and same with her. And then she's like, all right, I'm over this. I'm ready to just kind of be at home. I don't want to go out. I'm 70 whatever years old. I'm ready to be home. I don't want to be out. Let her do that. But I mean, because they were still married when they were divorced, Paulina got something. But you would have thought she would have had enough anyway.
I don't know. I don't know what I don't know if maybe she came along like before the super giant contract.
$6 million in 1985 is a ton of money, which I think is what like Estee Lauder or whoever it was she was working for at the time. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and it could have been that Rick was banking all his money and they just lived off of her money. Who knows? I'm not sure.
Baby, I forgot my wallet.
Right,
Can you get this tonight?
I've sold millions of records. Don't worry.
Yeah.
But allegedly, he also kept two of his sons, maybe from the marriage he really wasn't happy about. They were out of the will too. So it's like 4 out of his 6 sons got a piece of his estate, but 2 of them did not. I'm like, oh, geez, man. I don't really want to know what was going on with Rick's life, but he looks like a weirdo. Maybe he was a fucking weirdo, man. I don't know.
That's going to make for an uncomfortable Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Half of them are, 2 of them are way older than us, I think. 2 of them maybe around our age. Yeah. And then there's Paulina's kids are young and beautiful because they look like her, not like him.
This was one of those records that it's not that you forget about, but it's, you brought it up and I'm like, oh yeah, that was a huge record. I guess the thing is that about that time, there were so many coming out for us that it was, between 1984 and Pyromania and, even Thriller it wasn't my cup of tea, but I mean, there was just so much.
Synchronicity come out in 1983, it's and Duran Duran was making 7 in the Ragged Tiger around that time. I mean, to me, that was our pure pop days, man. That was before like 86, 87 when I started to figure out, all right, pop music isn't all that great. I got to get more into rock and roll and stuff that's going to be classic and good to me forever,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You could listen to the majority of top 40 radio in 1983 and 84 and be content with what you heard. Yeah. 86, 87, you were moving into, exactly. Let's see what else is out there.
Even like Level 42 had a song, There's Something About You. I'm like, oh, this is kind of jazzy. It's got something cool to it. I'm like, but even then I'm like, it's poppy. It's a great song. I'm like, but I'm not going to like this forever. Like I'm 12 and I'm like, I bet when I'm older, this isn't my favorite song.
You wouldn't go to the Level 42
now, I still do love that song, but I don't listen to Level 42. Like that tape doesn't get played anytime. So, yeah.
Well, that wraps episode number 77 of The Ugly American Werewolf in London. The Cars, Heartbeat City. If you grew up in the 80s like Action Jackson and I did, and you were a member of the MTV generation, you remember that album. That album was important to you. You couldn't escape it. It was awesome. It was fun. It was of the era. It's kind of an all-time classic in my book. It may not win big awards. It may not get on the top of a lot of people's lists. And certainly even Mutt Lange in his career, it might not make the top 5 or even top 10 albums he's ever worked on, but it does for me. The summer of 1984 with the Cars was memorable. I turned 11 that summer. I was all about playing basketball, riding my bike around the neighborhood, and getting into music, getting into MTV, like Van Halen and the Cars. And if you haven't heard that album in a long time, I highly recommend go give it a listen. You can listen to it straight through. It's not even 40 minutes, and it'll take you back. It'll take you straight back to a time. And if you've never heard it before, I think you'll like it. I mean, unless you hate the 80s, and it definitely sounds like the 80s. But if you like synth, new wave, rock and roll, this is among the best they made in that era. So thanks so much for listening, guys. And as usual, we want you to download, subscribe wherever you get your podcast, be it on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, YouTube. Good Pods has been very good to us. We're usually in the top 10 history and commentary lists, at least on a regular basis, maybe not every single day. Google Play, anywhere you get your podcast. And please, if you're thinking about it, if you do enjoy the show, wherever you listen, go out and give us a positive review. It just helps us find more rock and roll fans like you and helps us grow the show. Of course, you can always tweet us at ugly_werewolf and at ActionJack72. Did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss a point? Did we leave out your favorite part? You've got to let us know So tweet us at ugly_werewolf and at actionjack72. Once again, there's so many fun things going on the Wolf these days that I'm not even 100% sure what we're going to be doing next week. I think we're going to have a special guest on to talk about one of my favorite all-time English bands, Oasis, but maybe not. We'll see. Tune in anyway, and remember, rock and rollers, to all of you all around the world, be cool and stay safe.